Hey everyone, it's Sam McBride and Kristen Holstrom. We are back with another episode of Queens Off the Clock. Today we are diving back into Idaho 4, the theories, questioning everyone, questioning everything, analyzing the data, and really getting into all of the stuff that's circling online. And man, is there a lot. Kristen and I are going to continue to look at clips, look at evidence, and get into it. But today, again, we want to start talking about the theories. So we've already kind of talked in previous episodes about the potential that Dylan was making maybe inconsistent statements or made a statement to the police that was not really, I guess best way to say it, provided to us. And that would really give a different motive and opportunity out there for potentially other people to be involved, different things to happen, all of that. But today we want to get into some other potentials. So there's, Reddit is both your best friend and wow.
And your
But
worst enemy.
there are many Reddit users. And we briefly touched about this in another episode, but they pointed out kitchen photos. In one set of these photos, the room looks untouched, and in another, there's a blue bowl that wasn't there before. And so the question is, was it moved? Does it matter? When was it taken? Why does everything seem so jumbled up? Why are there photos taken at different times? Was this a cleanup? Is this just us going down a rabbit hole that doesn't exist? What do you think, Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest question I have is I feel like so many of these theories could be cleared up pretty easily with a paper trail of like when the document or when the pictures were taken in this perspective here. Show a time stamp, show that maybe other people that are in the crime scene really to make it authenticated that it was actually of the crime scene. Is it an edited photo? Is it just somebody on YouTube that's scrubbing a picture or editing a picture and then putting it back out to the universe and then people are diving into it as if it's true? I think that's, a big issue with a lot of the stuff that's on the internet these days, and it's only getting worse with AI.
But to that I say, what do you want us to do? We're going off what we can go off. And certainly there's stuff out there that has been tampered with either for entertainment purposes, nefarious reasons, who knows? But we have to kind of go and follow the trail of what we see. And we're trying to follow the evidence as best as we can. But Kristen, I think you just brought up a great point about timestamps and authenticating these documents is that it would be a very interesting, I think, rationale to go down. And that's because as attorneys ourselves, we know how important it is for evidence to be admissible and to lay what's called foundation and to authenticate things. So having a picture, it doesn't mean you get it into court because certainly with AI, things are susceptible to being modified. And so part of the process of entering evidence into court is authenticating it.
Yeah, and most of these pictures that Sam and I are going to talk about, these were released directly to the public from the PD. So a lot of this information is coming from the DA's office and the PD that obviously they use to rely on, and I think that that's why they've gotten so much attention lately. I can tell you one of the biggest things that I was noticing in the pictures, and I actually thought they were a lot less horrific than I had made them in my mind. Now, I do think that's part of it, that maybe they're not all being released to the public, which I completely understand. I do know that Maddie Mogan's parents had hired an attorney, same with the Chapins. And to what my understanding is, as we sit here today, is that the public's right to see these pictures actually aid on a balancing test, of their wanting to keep these pictures private. And I totally understand from a parent's perspective, 20 years from now, you don't necessarily want to see these pictures. But there were a lot of inconsistencies with the vision that is being painted and that is being put in front of us, it being one of the, reddest crime scenes of all time. And then you're looking at these pictures, you're kind of left with more questions than you were when you started looking at them. But with the bowls and the blue bowl, either that was taken at two separate times and there was cleanup in between the two pictures, or one of those pictures was scrubbed and altered. And if they took out the blue bowl, what else are they taking out?
And who's they? And when we're really looking at things changing and evidence changing, what we're trying to do is follow the path. And why would two similar pictures have different items in it? Like, what are we What conclusion do we draw from that? Because it's not nothing when it's a crime scene. It's a crime scene, right? So you may think to yourself, okay, well, it's a bag of chips. Who cares? Someone moved it out of the way. Well, no, I care because why was that happen? Is that a sign that the scene was changed, altered? Is it a sign that something was scrubbed? Is there a different reason for it? If there is, give us that reason. We don't have it.
And you know where my brain goes, Sam, is that was there a splatter pattern that might have been behind that blue bowl that is trying to be contained? Was there a fingerprint? Was something left that may have been out of place, may not be in line with the specific narrative that is trying to be portrayed? I mean, I agree with you. In a homicide case, especially a quadruple homicide, every fact, every picture, every splatter of red stuff is 100% relevant to following the evidence and getting to the truth. And that just, if you're doing that to one thing, what don't you want the public to see here?
Well, and here's the thing is what to me is concerning is even if the bull has no relevance whatsoever to the crime scene, doesn't matter if it stayed there or not, nothing would have changed. Even if so, the fact that something was altered raises that level of suspicion, raises that doubt. Do we have the full story? And all I can continue to conclude from this is I don't know what the story is. I don't know if we have the right guy. Sounds like we do. Maybe we don't. Maybe there's someone else involved. Maybe there's a bigger story that we're not seeing.
Yeah, and it also makes me, and I can probably speak for a lot of people in the public, that either if it was edited for whatever reason, it should have been identified in the photo that something was removed for the photo. The DA's office or the crime scene investigators, they don't even necessarily have to tell us. They can just simply show another picture, maybe with a different timestamp, or that something was intentionally removed. They don't even need to tell us why, but identify that that picture is different and why, right? But all it does for me is it makes me question every single piece of evidence more and more when I lose trust that the process is being done the way it should be done objectively and as things are and as not just as they seem but how they actually are. That picture should illustrate exactly what that room looked like at that exact time without it being tampered with. And then I start to lose the trust that this was done with integrity and professionally the way any crime scene should be investigated.
And then you think to yourself, if something is contaminated, even if you believe it's for a benign reason, it again opens up the doubt.
No, in law school, we learn about a concept called fruit of the poisonous tree, and it's in a criminal procedure class, usually around your second or your third year. And the concept isn't identical, but this is how it works in my brain. So if I'm looking at that picture and something is tampered with or modified and I don't know, and therefore I'm using that picture to make speculations and conclusions thereafter based on that picture, when in reality, that picture was not a true and accurate depiction of what that crime scene looked like, then all of my conclusions thereafter are also not accurate, and therefore my conclusions are fruit of the poisonous tree.
Yeah, and what Kristen is talking about, really, I agree with you, but it's an analogy, right? From criminal law, there's essentially a doctrine where if a police officer, as I understand it, at least goes in and illegally obtains evidence, meaning they did it without a search warrant or they did it without whatever they did,
Kind of like the genetic testing in this case.
and then they say, okay, but that led us to this, led us to this. The idea is no, if you got something that was illegally obtained in the onset, that you can't then use that or erase the wrongdoing of it. And I think it's a great point. It's just we've now bred in so much insecurity in how this investigation was run, and all the way from witnesses kind of giving their stories together, the gap of time with the 911 call, the contradicting statements from what is released versus now when we're getting more information, now that we have a conviction and a guilty plea. It really keeps you up at night, quite literally keeps up Kristen at night. I sleep through the night, but it keeps up Kristen.
And what you were just saying, I mean, it just totally sparked a little light bulb in my brain right now. but the DNA that they were able to connect from the crime scene and the victims, and I think they actually connected it to Brian's dad, if I'm correct. It's my understanding, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not completely 100% sure on this, but it's my understanding that they're not allowed to use those ancestry sites for purposes of solving a crime. Ancestry.com, and then there's other ones, and you get a cheek swab or you do it another way, and then you go into a database and a registry. It is my understanding that FBI police departments are prohibited from using those registries to actually match a suspect to a crime scene. And in this case, it's kind of like they came out and said, yeah, we're not allowed to use it. I think Ann Taylor did a great job arguing against this issue in court, to the point where the DA side said, oh, we're not going to use that. We have enough evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, to get Brian on this thing. And so we're not even going to use that. But that goes back to other episodes that Sam and I have talked about, where you can't unring that bell, right?
Mhm.
But I'm sitting there going, almost everything that they came out with following that match, that DNA match, would arguably have been fruit of the poisonous tree.
Yeah, and I think sort of another way to look at that is to say, look, Kristen and I were family law attorneys in California. We're not criminal attorneys. This is just our opinions based on assumptions and all of that. But when you are doing an investigation, there are legal procedures that need to be followed. And if they are not followed, then the evidence you obtained may be tainted, which means it could otherwise be inadmissible in court. So, assuming that you need, in fact, a warrant or some other legal procedure which would allow you to access the database like 23andMe or whatever it is, assuming you need that and you don't have it, and then you take that information to build up your case, that's a problem. That's a concern, constitutional concern, if you will. And that is, again, goes back to the unease in this investigation and just the general unease in, like, do we not have all the information? Because the idea with the fruit of the poisonous tree is to deter potential misconduct from law enforcement, right? In the gathering of the investigation, because what you don't want to happen is, not this case, but hey, you have a cop show up and one person looks kind of guilty, so they decide they're guilty. And so they go collect the evidence that points to this person, and they don't follow the evidence that they have from legal protocol to get a alleged perpetrator, to then forward that to the DA to then prosecute the case.
Yeah, and one of the easiest examples, because criminal procedure can get very lawyery very quickly, but one of the easiest ways is say that they don't have a reason, or they don't have probable cause when they pull you over to look in your trunk. And then the police officer goes and looks in your trunk, and he doesn't have the right to do that or probable cause to do that. And then we have rugs in there, and maybe we have a weapon. And this went from getting pulled over for a speeding ticket to now you're facing felony charges. So that's kind of the easiest way to look at that example. But when we're talking about the investigative genetic genealogy, that whenever you see it on YouTube or you see it on Reddit, that's IgG. And what that refers to is the use of DNA, especially more advanced DNA profiles that are used in standard criminal databases, to search genealogy databases and to build family trees. The goal is to find genetic relatives of a DNA sample. Who's your mom? Who's your dad? Who's your aunt? Who's your sister? Who's your great aunt? And then they use that relationship information plus what's available in public records to narrow down suspects. So in this case, the DNA from the knife she found at the crime scene was tested. When that DNA didn't match anyone in CODIS, okay, that's the standard criminal DNA database that everybody uses to see if we can, match the DNA to the suspect, investigators developed an SNP, which is a profile that is made from the DNA. And this gets really technical and scientific, and I actually went down a couple Reddit rabbit holes. But something for everyone to think about on this is, how were they allowed to use that when it wasn't a matching CODIS? And then they were able to get the genetic relative of his dad from the trash that they were able to get out of the trash can from his family residence in Pennsylvania. And if anyone follows the whole crime con thing, we had Ethan Chapin's mom who was co-presenting a segment at CrimeCon just very recently in August of 2025. And it was a segment based on the Idaho tragedy and how Othram Industries, quote unquote, helped solve the case. And Kristen Middleman was there presenting with Stacy Chapin, and she is the chief development officer over at Othram Industries, which is probably going to be a multi-billion-dollar company one day because they get to say that they were the ones that found Bryan Kohberger. Now, when I say they, Kristen actually let it slip during this segment that they were able to solve this case within 5 days. Now, that is completely inconsistent with what we have been fed and what we have been told throughout this process, because that means they would have known not only who the suspect was, but they matched that suspect within 5 days. Okay. And they didn't even come out and say that they even had a suspect within 5 days. Like, not
And there
even
may
close.
be reason for that, right? We don't know. And certainly when we're looking at this stuff, we're just seeing what's reported online. And these are just our recollections and opinions of what's being said. But I mean, if true, again, it just goes back to it. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing. But if there are things we don't understand, like concluding that somebody committed a crime within less than a week's time, I have an issue with potentially, not always, but potentially when there were a lot of other evidence out there, there's a lot of other things that haven't really been thoroughly investigated, assuming 5 days in, right? There's a lot that hadn't happened by that point. So if that's true, if that was an accurate slip, that raises a flag. Whether that flag would have changed anything long term is a different discussion, but it certainly is kind of a really.
And they very openly claim, I mean, I can only imagine the social media that's going to come out in the marketing campaigns, but they very openly claim that they did more than help solve this case. And I agree with Sam. If we're talking about a crime where show me a piece of authentic video evidence that 1000% without reasonable doubt connects BK to the King Roadhouse. And if it is out there, show us. That's the thing. If it is out there, show us. Show us a video of him driving by the next morning, not just a white Hyundai Elantra. Show us if you have this evidence. Like, I'm asking for it. We're all asking for it. The whole content creator YouTube universe is asking for it.
Right.
But for a crime that seems to have such a lack of actual evidence with both witnesses or videos or actual recordings that may or may not have been scrubbed that can be connected, I find it very hard to believe that this was solved in 5 days.
Right.
Especially when there's still one more DNA on that knife sheath that we don't know who it is.
Very
What do you think
interesting.
about that, Sam? You think there could be either a supplemental suspect or an alternative suspect? I mean, do you think that's a possibility?
I think that I don't always feel this way with cases, but I think that there's so much, even that I haven't absorbed yet online from just the evidence that has came out. And there's so much inconsistency that I think to assume that we know exactly what happened is not totally likely. Maybe we have the right person convicted. Maybe we don't. Maybe there's someone else. I don't know the answers to this. I can't wave a magic wand and know the truth. I wish I could, and I'm sure you guys all do too. But there's just a lot of issues with consistency. And there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of concern almost everywhere you turn. And then, of course, I just think that the natural conclusion everyone wants to make, if you're not Mr. or Mrs. Conspiracy Theorist, is, well, we have a conviction, ergo, we're done with this. Let's close the book. And I, too, just in being an attorney and looking at the judiciary and looking at the process, think it's really important for people to be critical of it. It doesn't mean that we're attempting to disparage anyone per se. It's just to say, hey, look, we want to make sure that these protections are upheld in a way that is fair, that is transparent, And that allows for consistency and also allows the public to challenge these things, because if we can't challenge it as the public and we can't look at this evidence, I think that's a greater concern for us.
And when you become an attorney and you take your oath, you are an officer of the court. And obviously, I have no relationship to anybody involved in the case, the either side of the case, the defendant or the prosecution or even the victims. But sitting as an attorney, it's so hard to just turn a blind eye when there's one thing after another. It's hard enough to question, one thing, was that process done right? Is it authenticated? How do we know that that's his car? It just seems there's a lot of assumptions, and it could be, it 100% could be, but to do it on almost every piece of evidence in this case, and almost everything is circumstantial, it's like, man, I wish we could go back in time. I really, really do. And
Yeah. And
go
I
through.
also think I think this, which is maybe not the best thing to say, but here I go. I think that it is a really lame thing to do, is to just chalk everyone online up to internet sleuths. I think that that doesn't track. I think it's low-hanging fruit, because we were talking about fruit this whole episode. I think it's low-hanging fruit. I think if it's inaccurate, if there's something we or someone is saying that's wrong, show us why it's wrong. Fill in the timeline in a way that makes it logical and makes it make sense. Show us how the evidence connects in a way that doesn't bring up all these concerns, because all of these people are surrounding this case in particular have questions. And I think that there's a lot of intelligent people out there that are asking the right questions. And I think it's dangerous to make people stop talking, or to just chalk it up as they're just conspiracy theorists, internet sleuths. Really important stuff.
No, I think it's super important, especially when we're talking about a human's, life, whether they're sitting in prison for the rest of their life or whether they're being put in front of a literal firing squad. I think that every human has the right, really beyond a reasonable doubt, to make sure that the justice system is really working. And I just wanted to give a little bit more kind of analysis when we were talking about the IGG, because it's really a fascinating area of law, and it's actually a really new area. But as we know, the knife she found at the scene, it had a single source male DNA. And then that actual DNA was flown to Texas, where Othram Industries is. And I think we've talked a little bit about this on other shows. And then the FBI got involved and they kind of took it from there. And that's where it gets a little dicey with the arguments: is, did Othram solve the crime? Because that is completely inconsistent with what the FBI claims. They claim they basically took their information and then they were able to find Kohberger. But there's a lot of constitutional issues raised with this. The defense challenged, and Ann Taylor and her team, they did a really good job really challenging the use of the IGG, and they made several arguments. So, Sam, we know the expectation of privacy. Defense was saying that they couldn't use the SNP and the genealogy databases that they use to be able to match Kohberger's relatives, right? Because everybody that does one of those tests for the purposes of figuring out your ancestry, it's not a reasonable expectation of privacy to think that my DNA is going to be used in a crime.
Yeah. And so I think the point there is, when you're looking at this reasonable expectation of privacy, and everyone's talking about it, and it gets talked about in family law, it gets talked about in a lot of different contexts. But the idea is really, the crux of it is, do you have a expectation of privacy in whatever is occurring? So the best example that I could give is recordings. Depending on the state, some parties are a two-party consent state, and there's always exceptions to that. And then some parties are a one-party recording state. So California, generally speaking, is a two-party consent state, which means you need to have an expectation of privacy in your communications if you're being recorded. Potentially, sometimes, unless there's an exception. And so if I'm the defense, I'm arguing, look, whoa, somebody that is submitting their DNA for like a fun genealogy, do I have 15 siblings that I didn't know of? How do I find my long lost cousin? Do they have an expectation that in a criminal investigation, their DNA is going to be used to potentially trace them or some known family member back to a crime? And so that's the question. So if I'm the defense, I'm arguing, no, 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 this is absolute violation of privacy. Who buys a 49.99 23andMe or whatever it was to give your DNA so that you could match with a cousin and think that that could somehow swirl you into an investigation and maybe one that you have nothing to do with really, but just then being susceptible, not just to
Mhm.
this investigation,
To
any
any.
investigation.
And I was thinking, back during the COVID area, that was probably the craziest time in the world. I mean, I know I had a few tests done and those were cheek swabs. And that was the first thing I thought of is, did we all end up in a database because our cheek was swabbed for a virus? And, I had three very small kids at the time and it was new and there was a little bit of fear at the beginning. And running a law firm, Sam and I had to take a couple tests, just to make sure that we were always watching out for people that were more susceptible. But that's the first thing that came to my mind. And I'm like, how many databases am I in that I didn't
And
consent to?
for those of you out there that are answering, well, yeah, you should have no expectation of privacy. Take it another step further. Should you have an expectation of privacy in your own home that somebody's not recording you that doesn't live in the home? Should you have an expectation of privacy with your medical records? I think most people would raise their hands and say HIPAA. Oh yeah, I don't want the information provided to be readily available. So the expectation of privacy is very real. The question, again, from a legal context, is whether this particular event is something that people should have an expectation of privacy. And I think where I fall on it is probably different from the next person. Everyone has their own threshold, but I like to start from the idea that everything should be private and slowly, carefully peel back from there.
Okay, so we have on the other side of this, we have Thompson and the team, and then we have the judge, and it was argued that Kohberger had no reasonable expectation of privacy in the sheath because crime scene DNA by law is something that no privacy interest attaches to. So I don't even think this really would have been an issue 10 years ago, right? It's becoming more and more. Now, another thing that I thought was a good argument that Ann Taylor and team actually put out there was the defense wanted a full picture of how this process happened, which databases were searched, what leads were used, what leads, if any, were ignored, and how did you build this family tree? And it's kind of like, show me your math. I'm not saying I dispute with your answer, but show me your math,
And I think it's a great argument to make
I
because
agree.
it goes back to everything. It goes back to the fruit of the poisonous tree. How did you get this? Is this reverse engineered, or were you more accurately following the evidence to find your suspect in an admissible way? Or did you find your suspect and go backwards? Or did you figure out some other way and maybe you're not telling everyone what exactly happened? And those things happen. That's why the doctrine exists. And those things happen. That's why the defense is arguing that way. And these are major issues which can have potentially catastrophic results depending on which side, whether you're prosecution or defense. Think about what a big deal this would be for the prosecution if that evidence had to be excluded and they couldn't use anything from it. It would be catastrophic to the
Oh, I
prosecution.
agree.
So these small issues that people kind of cast over are really issues that can have an absolute difference on whether someone takes a plea, whether what the prosecution is going to offer as a plea, or how the trial is going to unfold in general. Because when you're in the context of a trial, remember, you're going forward with the evidence that is admissible, and that's the only stuff that the jury is getting with their jury instructions. They're being told very clearly not to look online, not to talk to people about it, to make their own assumption and opinions. And what a hard thing to do in this day and age when you can't even look at your phone without it blowing up of all media stuff.
Yeah, and when they talk about what leads may or may have not been ignored, was there any possible errors? Was there a lead that was omitted or ignored that wasn't intentional? Was there a lead that was ignored that we all have internal inherent biases that we always can't navigate around. It's just part of being human. But I think that that could have completely changed the outcome and everything from that match. They were trying to continue the narrative that we have to match everything around to our match. So how do we connect BK to this? How do we connect BK to this? How do we connect BK to this? So they're looking for those ways. But if you say, hey, we can't use this match, I say it again, where do we go back to that gets us the same result with what we're being shown? The court did make orders in this case that some of it needed to be disclosed. And when they ever say that it's going to be an in-camera hearing, it basically is where both sides of the attorneys, the judge, possibly a clerk, and they're auditing or they're going through these records while being videotaped, like in full disclosure for anybody to watch.
And why that is important goes back to the age-old issue that when stuff isn't totally documented and totally followed by procedure, issues occur. And so to prevent the suggestion, even if it's all benign and you're passing it over per court order, which we're assuming every officer of the court would do, and that, we want to assume that everything would be perfect absent human error, but it also prevents it's safety for the side that's giving over the evidence because it prevents the continued suggestion that something is tampered. So if it's not tampered, of course you want that in camera because you want to be able to prove, look, I did these steps correct. And it's really a crucial issue.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Sam. And I always say, if there's nothing to hide, let's do it all in camera. It's like when Sam and I have a client or an opposing party and someone's saying, hey, no, I don't ever drink. I'm not a danger to the child and I would never drink and drive. And I haven't ever used drugs. And it's like, okay, will you go get tested for me? And usually sometimes we'll ask them to do it privately just so we can see the results. Obviously, you don't want to do that if you don't know the answer. But if it's the opposing party, oh, I'm going after that pretty hard. And I'm saying, okay, well, if we have no issue, show me, prove it to me. But the last thing I found intriguing, and I wanted to continue doing research on it, and it's the question, the IgG that led to the warrant, okay? And whether or not that specific DNA was included in the warrant, did it establish probable cause? So obviously there's both sides on whether or not that the IgG was actually included in the warrant. And I do think that the DNA came back and said, hey, we didn't have it in the probable cause. And then the defense claimed, that the IgG was effectively the tip that pointed to Kohberger. And I do think there's a lot more analysis and research that needs to be done there. But in February 2025, Hippler did rule that the DNA technique is fair and admissible, denying the defense's request to suppress the IgG-related evidence. And I think that was the point in the case that took a lot of wind out of Ann Taylor's sails.
And that's because how that type of evidence would likely affect a jury's decision. It's pretty confirmatory evidence that the person that is sitting there is the guy or one of the guys or an issue. And you have to consider that, as an attorney, and you consider, Kristen and I do this all the time, the likelihood of success in your case, whether you believe very deeply that something should go the other way or not, is not always the analysis. It's looking at the admissible evidence, looking at the potential in court, and having someone make a meaningful decision that is going to affect the rest of their life.
Yeah, I just go back because that was I had been following the case before, but that was the point, and I think it was actually that ruling that really, really fascinated me. Because again, this is not something that comes up a lot or has really been a big issue, in a lot of cases. I think with all of these 23andMe, Ancestry.com, all the other ones, I think it's a big issue. And I will think twice before doing another cheek swab and trying to see exactly what my heritage looked like after this case. But I think that was the turning point for me, that I was like, okay, there are some very complex legal issues in this case that I'm just not satisfied with the answers on.
Mm-hmm. All
so
right.
We'll save it for the next episode on who else's DNA is on that sheath, Sam. Who is it?
Yeah, exactly. And before we sort of wrap up today, Kristen and I wanted to draw some attention to a recent video that we saw from Outcast. If you're not subscribing to him, you should go subscribe to him. He's awesome. So shout out to Outcast. But we just watched this video titled Idaho 1320 Linda Lane, 5:05:37 a.m. And boy, oh boy, is it shocking. Everyone go watch it. Kristen and I are going to talk about it a little bit later in another episode. I mean, talk about stuff that just makes you go, wow, is this possible? Do we have it all? And if this is a potential, what does this mean for what really happened in the timeline and really happened in the case and who was really involved?
Yeah, I love Outcast's content. I know that I've gotten Sam on his channel as well. I think he does a really good job. I think he's a master at what he does with respect to audios, and he really audits them layer by layer of what you and I and most people that are just listening to a song have no idea, how we would get rid of any background noise. But I encourage you to go check it out. He has a great channel. He has a lot of good content. But Sam and I want to do a live here, coming up pretty soon at some point in the near future. And there's a couple things we want to talk about, and that is one of the big things. Please go check out that video. Tell us what you think. Is it a ghost? Are we seeing things? Is it a mountain lion? What is it? Are we being rational, or are we being reasonable? Or are we completely losing our minds, which is actually a plausible answer? And I want to know what everybody thinks. Who is that second source of male DNA on the sheath? Was there enough trace DNA to identify it? Is the truth just being hidden with respect to that? Or is this not even real news? I also want to know about the glove that was found outside the house. What do you guys think about that? I think there's a lot of good stuff that we can dig into on a live. And we really want everyone to think outside the box, put your thinking caps on, think for yourself who, what, when, why, how do we get there? Be able to have a good conversation and analyze each and every issue.
That's right. And Kristen and I are just getting started with this. So please stay tuned, continue to like and subscribe, and watch all of Kristen and I's stuff. We appreciate you. We want to hear from you, and we can't wait to see you next time.
So make sure you like and subscribe. That is how we get in front of more people and have a bigger audience. So if you like us, please send us a comment, show us the love. We really enjoy doing this and having you guys do it with us. And if you are looking for any other content more about family law, please head over to our other channel, which is called Custody Queens, and like and subscribe there as well.
That's right, because Kristen and I, as a reminder, we're certified family law specialists in our day job. So we are actual attorneys in California, and we're family law attorneys at that. So although this show is about our opinions, speculations, and kind of the geeky stuff that we do off the clock, really, we have quite an interesting show. And if you're interested in family law, child custody, divorce, and any of those things, you can check us out over there.
And at your dinner tonight, talk about IGG. That is a great dinner time topic. Until next time.
Until next time.